Okay.
How would you respond if you received a phone call or even worse, found the body of a loved one who had just died by suicide? Suicide can be a very traumatic experience for family members and friends. This is my cousin Kel. We are the same age, grew up together, playing as little kids, hanging out as teenagers when we did get the chance to. He did pass away by suicide just a little over a year ago, and he was found by close family members. The information I'm going to share with you today is from my own experience and knowledge, as well as family members and friends of Kel, and some research that I've done for this speech. This topic is more important to me because according to Harvard Health Medical School, more than 45,000 people take their own lives each year, leaving behind struggling family members and friends. I'm one of those family members, as some of you may be as well or have to experience this at some point in your life. The death of a loved one is never easy, and the circumstances of a death by suicide make it more challenging, seeming it to be like no other. Today, I'm going to discuss the traumatic aftermath, common reactions, and the guilt that is followed by a death by suicide. The first point I want to share is the traumatic aftermath. It is not uncommon, depending on the situation, for family members and friends to have to go through an investigation. Death by suicide is sudden and sometimes very violent, leaving behind what police consider to be evidence. Police are often involved in questioning family members, taking photos, and gathering evidence to determine that the death was in fact a suicide. Sometimes family members and friends are asked if they want to visit the death scene, even though it is discouraged. Often they do just so they don't leave it to their imaginations. It is common for family members to have disturbing images of their loved one's suicide, regardless of whether they did actually see the death scene. They often have reoccurring thoughts of the death and circumstances around it, struggling to get the repeating images out of their head. Post-traumatic stress disorder, often known as PTSD, can be developed by some family members. This is an anxiety disorder where they involuntarily relive their images. It is greater for those who have witnessed or found their loved ones. Now that I've talked about the traumatic events following suicide, let's discuss the common reactions. There can be a lot of shame around death by suicide for loved ones, having to acknowledge that a loved one took their own life and feeling uncomfortable speaking of the suicide. Things such as religious factors and family differences on how to discuss the deaths with others and children can be an added factor. In addition to shame, which can last for years, relatives also blame one another, thinking that actions or lack of actions could have contributed to the event. Blaming someone can give a sense of control, answering their own questions when in fact those questions may never be answered. Blaming others enables feelings of anger that they have for the suicide itself. Family members and friends are often angry with the person who died. I recall my aunt who experienced Kel's death saying, "How could he do this to me? He knew how much that this would hurt me." Feelings of abandonment are especially intense after a suicide. Following common reactions, the next obstacle the family goes through is guilt. There are a lot of what-if questions after any death, but after a suicide, these questions are almost self-punishing. What if I would have been there more? What if I would have answered their phone call that morning? What if I would have noticed the signs? What if I was more attentive to what was happening? All of these often lead to overestimating the ability to affect the outcome. We cannot control all that happens in our lives. Family members and friends left behind after suicide would rather fault themselves than accept their inability to have prevented what happened. A final step for family members and friends is moving on, which can be the most difficult and bring a lot of guilt. After losing someone through suicide, it is a fact that your life will never be the same. Moving on with simple routines of life and any feelings you may have of happiness brings those added guilt. Today I have talked about the traumatic aftermath, the common reactions, and the guilt family members and friends experience following death by suicide. The death of a loved one is never easy, and the circumstances of a death by suicide make it more challenging, seeming it to be like no other. Suicide survivors can find individual counseling and support groups that can be very helpful, especially around the holidays or the anniversary of the death. Some who might not feel comfortable meeting in person or don't have the access to can always turn to internet support groups as a resource. I would like to end with a quote by Jeffrey Jackson. "How can I live knowing they're not here? Your mind may taunt you. Your strength lies in knowing that whilst your loved one has chosen death, you have chosen life, and life is a gift that we honor by living."